to episode 3 of Flute Fix. This is a series of videos where I answer your questions about the flute, so please send in your questions to me at rodflute for Instagram and Roderick Seed Flute for Facebook. You can also contact me via my website, roderickseedflute.com. The first question comes from Hazel, and she wants to know, when do I use the B flat lever and why? And so the right hand B flat lever, that's this one, is really useful. It's just another fingering for B flat. The other ones are with the 1 and 1, and then we have the thumb B flat. And they all have their uses. So if you're playing a piece with a lot of B flats, say for example it's in B flat major or F major, I'll often just use the thumb B flat because that's what I'll need and there aren't any B naturals coming up. So that's quite easy. And it doesn't make any difference to the other notes. The fingering with the 1 and 1 is really good to feel a good balance of the flute. So it's quite a good one if you're just warming up. It's also good when you do have a lot of B naturals in there, but it's not too fast. But then when it starts to get faster, it's really useful to use the lever because you just have to touch it very slightly and it will create the B flat by covering this hole up here. So it's very easy just to brush that one. And then trilling to an A is really good because the lever already goes down when you play an A. So you can just leave that down and trill that key there. So that's one of the other great uses. Another thing that is good is that you can do really nice legato. So you're coming from a B natural and you just really gradually put that down. You don't have to press a whole key and you're not having to cover 2 tone holes down the end. So you can be really smooth with the legato there. But I would practice all 3 fingerings and just make them easy to use in any circumstance. So practice your scales with all 3. So that it just becomes an alternative fingering and you can pick and choose as you like. So I hope that helps. The next question comes from Verena in Canada, and she's asking about daily practice, whether to stick to a set regimen of scales and studies or to base her practice on the repertoire that she's playing. And this is an interesting question and quite difficult to answer, but I can tell you how I practice and maybe that might help you. So for me, I like to have a bit of a plan so that I'm covering all bases, as it were. So I'm doing a warm-up every day, that could be harmonics, singing and playing, just something to open up the sound. Then I would do some tone exercises in more detail, so maybe do some low register work, moist sonority exercises. Then I'd move on to some scales and studies, and then do some repertoire. that I'm going to be doing, say for a recital or something. So that's something that I like to try and stick to, but I don't play the same stuff every day. I try to change something so that I'm always being creative in practice, because I think that's really important to make sure that you're practicing creatively and not getting bored. So if you have a Moise sonority exercise, try and change it up. Include some harmonics or singing and playing. If you've got scales, compose your own variations of scales to sort of work on different fingerings and things like that. So if you're working on some repertoire though, like let's say you're working on the Enescu Cantabile and Presto, and there's several tricky things in that piece, I would try and feed those into your practice routine. So put something of Enescu in each little compartment of your practice. So if you've got a warm-up of singing and playing, you could just sing and play the opening melody. And then you can practice with your tone exercises, let's say sonority. You can use that rhythm and those intervals to practice within that sort of sonority framework. So let's say we're working on that jump down from A flat to C. We can do it in a sonority way. So that by the time you get down to low C, you don't really notice how difficult that is. But if you purely worked on that from the repertoire, you might obsess with that interval. And so it sets up a negative stimulus in the brain, and you'll get tense when you get to that section. Same thing with, say, the double tonguing in the Poulenc sonata. You might obsess on those particular notes with the double tonguing practice, whereas if you incorporated double tonguing into your scale practice, you will have a more indirect approach to fixing that technical issue. And the other thing is that you might not have a big selection of music. The flute repertoire isn't that huge anyway, and some technical things might be missing from that, which you might need to practice for orchestra stuff. So try to bring those together and work on everything in a sort of holistic way so that you're not missing out on other things. So next thing, if you're working on studies, practice them in different dynamics and different keys so that you're working on all different things like intonation of certain notes. With your scales, you might want to do some variations so if you've got Tafanel, just put some turns in there, or etc., just to make your practice more enjoyable. and take away the stress element of learning repertoire. And so once you get back into repertoire, at the end of that cycle of practice, you're just like enjoying it, and you're working on the music, and the technique that you've worked on carries you through that piece. And if you still find things difficult in the repertoire, just make a note of it and then put it in tomorrow's practice. So let's say the Ionescu's presto, the double tonguing bit, or the very high note at the end of the cantabile. If that keeps going wrong, do some reverse harmonics. So that you're always certain that you're going to get that high note, but you're not just focusing on that particular high note in that particular piece. So I hope that helps. Just try and combine everything, music and technique, so that they're not two separate things. The next question comes from Diane, and she wants to know about bad tone days. How do you fix them, and how do you prevent them from happening in the first place? And I think if I had the definitive answer for this question, I would be the wealthiest flute player out there. But there are so many different ways you can prevent them, but that's not to say that they'll work. They might help a little bit, but if you have a bad tone day, sometimes you just have to embrace it and say, okay, today's bad, and it's not the end of the world. So to prevent bad tone days, I like to make sure that the condition of my body is the best it can be. So usually when I'm having a bad tone day, it's because I've got very dry lips. So to prevent that, I make sure that I put lip balm on overnight so they don't dry out. If they do feel pretty dry and a little bit sort of flaky, I will use a simple scrub of some sugar and olive oil and just rub that to sort of take away some of the excess skin, and that sometimes helps. Other things that help are Alexander techniques, so doing some lying down on the floor with a couple of books underneath your head and just working on breathing, creating more space, helping the back align nicely. All of those things will help prevent or stand you in better stead for getting a good tone. Maybe that's the better way to think about it, is to enable a good tone rather than prevent a bad tone. Other things that might affect the body, like if you're feeling quite sluggish, you could do some simple jumping jacks, star jumps, or go for a quick run or walk and just breathe, work on blowing out, releasing the air well, and then coming back to the flute. And if that helps, that's good. If it doesn't, there's some other things that we can try. Sometimes it's about the diet as well, like if you're eating salty foods or red wine, I often find that doesn't help with the tone. So I try to avoid those. I drink water. I often find a nice banana or piece of chocolate helps, or coffee helps, but sometimes it doesn't. Tea doesn't help my sound. So you can experiment with what foods might help you or avoid the ones that don't help you. More flute orientated, you can do various exercises that get you back into shape. So if you haven't practiced for a while, the tone might not be there, and that could be the muscles have just lost a little bit of their tone for playing, the breathing's not quite right, etc., and the sound might be a bit airy and spread out. So I would do some things like pitch bending, find the center of my sound, and then I'd do it in a different way by smiling and making a sad face. So finding that happy balance of the muscle use. I'd also work on singing and playing just to help free the sound and resonate more. So let's say we've got any note. Then I'd just do some basic blowing exercises without the tongue. So I would say embrace the fact that we all have bad tone days, and enjoy trying to find out how you get good tone. So for example, if you're finding that your sound is very airy, enjoy finding out how you get to a focus sound. And then you've got that skill for when you do have a bad tone day in the future. You can try it and see if that will help you. And then you can remember, okay, maybe the breathing's not quite right, I'm a bit sluggish, I'll just go for a quick run and that might fix it. But quick fixes tend not to be so beneficial in the long run. Try to find what works for you and work on that technique. So let's say you've got an unfocused sound. Okay, so what is causing this unfocused sound? Have a look in the mirror, record yourself, observe what you might be doing that's getting in the way of the sound, and then have a look at some more focused areas. So the lips, are they too spread out? So let's see. Good, so I start to introduce a little bit of these muscles, the whistling muscles, and the sound's starting to get better. What about my airspeed? Is it too slow, perhaps? Okay, so adding a bit faster air into the mix there, so focusing the embouchure, blowing a bit faster, that's helped me. So let's go back to bad tone. And then just try and get it every time. So it's building up the muscle memory and the consistency of sound. And that, I think, will be more beneficial. So enjoy experimenting and let me know how you get on.